My name is Shudipta Roy, and I'm the senior researcher at the World Faith Development Dialogue at Georgetown University. And it's a great pleasure both to participate in this panel and also welcoming you as the guest. The topic of this panel discussion is the role and governance of multi-religious collaboration to improve pandemic response and resilience. During the course of the COVID-19 pandemic so far, the topic has taken many forms and shapes. Many commentators have been asking how the faith leaders and practitioners. By the way, before I speak more, I think I have an announcement to make that if you are using the translator, the translation channel is R. This is the room C and translation channel is R. Okay. So as I was saying, many commentators have been asking how the faith leaders and practitioners can adapt themselves to this new social, cultural, practical, political, and economic realities of the 21st century. And the debate has, if anything, been sharpened and intensified by the current crisis. We have seen in the beginning of the pandemic, during the chaotic phases, religious communities, particularly the faith-based minorities, are blamed, attacked, and ostracized, both in person and in the spaces of social media for spreading the virus. The history of challenging times like this show how discrimination and scapegoating are accentuated against different communities. We saw tension amassed over the ethics of religious congregations or the Assembly of the Faithful during the pandemic. Dane David, a pastor of Impact Christian Church in Victorville, California, about 84 miles northeast from here, asked a jarring question in an op-ed on July 18th, 2020. Will the church survive COVID-19? On the other hand, according to the Pew Research data from 2020, more Americans than people in other economically developed countries say the COVID-19 outbreak has bolstered their religious faith. In other settings, as James Balta from London School of Economics Faith Center argues, that addressing the pandemic is providing a common purpose in the face of religious tensions. It also raises questions about how religious institutions, beliefs, leaders, and practices are contributing positively and not so positively to the ongoing coronavirus crisis and response. Professor Catherine Marshall writes, religious actors have large roles to play, particularly in addressing challenges centered on safe religious gatherings and adaptations of rituals, building trust, promoting effective communication and advocacy, and identifying and responding to the needs of communities. They're also critically involved in countering hate speech and misinformation, and in addressing various conflicts ranging from domestic to geopolitical. In this rapidly evolving situation, religious voices should be part of the broad policy exchange based on an informed and nuanced understanding of development. One such example would be the launch of Global Multi-Religious Faith in Action, COVID-19 initiative by Religion for Peace. In March 2020, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University, the World Faith Development Dialogue, and Joint Learning Initiative launched a collaborative effort to explore the responses of religious actors to the COVID-19 pandemic and organize information. The COVID-19 pandemic presents major challenges in profound and still evolving ways, with high death tolls and extreme economic and social impact worldwide. As of May 3rd, 2022, the Latin America and the Caribbean region had nearly 1.7 million deaths, over 27% of deaths worldwide. Another 1,050,000 reported deaths caused by the novel coronavirus in Northern America so far. Combined, 40.2% of global COVID deaths occurred in this region. We call it the Americas. The UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean estimated that 17 million people in Latin America moved into poverty in 2020. The socioeconomically poor and other vulnerable groups remain at greatest risk, including those living in marginalized communities such as ethno-religious and gendered minorities, migrants in temporary settlement, and prisoners in crowded jails. Against this broad background, I'd like to ask three major questions for today's panel for consideration. What types of collaborative approaches did you and your organization take to respond to the pandemic? How were you able to help your faith communities, or fail to do so, disseminate all the information and counter misinformation around the pandemic? And what does resilience mean? We talk about resilience all the time. In your context, and how can leaders of different faith traditions better collaborate to create resilient communities? So these are some of the questions we'll be discussing in this panel, and each of you will have about 10 minutes. Then in the course of half an hour or so, in the end, we'll take questions from the audience and have an open discussion on some broad range of topics and thoughts on this issue. We have a distinguished panel today, and I have the pleasure to introduce them with leaders and practitioners from different parts of the world. We have Joao Diniz, regional leader, World Vision, Latin America and the Caribbean. We have Sister Rosana Matos Gomez, Caribbean Area Organization Advisor, Relief Society, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have Alberto Mansur, Executive Board Member, Cadena International. We have two missing persons, Ivan Camilo Vargas and Rohan couldn't make it today. So I think we have great company here and qualified panelists to address these issues. I won't take any more time. I will invite first Joao to give his presentation.
Thank you, Sudipta, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Now I'll switch to Spanish, or at least to Portuñol. I'm from Brazil and try to speak Spanish.
It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. I would like to firstly emphasize the fact that the pandemic has impacted all humanitarian organizations, because the first thing that it affected was their capacity to respond. All teams within organizations were impacted there in the fields, communities, alliances, because they couldn't move around. So the first aspect for us was to protect our people and to adapt our operations. World Vision acts in 15 countries in Latin America with direct offices from Chile to the Caribbean. And this was a great challenge because we are living a crisis within a crisis. As someone said before, the COVID exacerbated the situation in Latin America. Our response within this period had as objectives to limit the expansion of the COVID within the continent, and once that it became the epicenter of the COVID in the world, Latin America, then to establish health systems. And the third issue is to support children, boys and girls, which is a very invisible part of the pandemic because many people think they are not affected, but the secondary effect on children was huge in the area of education, mental health, and many other issues. And also to advocate for rights and the mobilization of alliances and partners around the area. As a result of all this, we were able to reach about 13 million people, about 5 million children in the whole of Latin America, and to mobilize not only our resources, but also additional ones, almost $50 million. But to be more precise, when it comes to communities, they were also affected, these communities. And I want you to think, for example, in our case, we worked a lot with faith communities, Christian communities of all kinds. Don't we didn't think about the big ones. We thought about the small ones who were in the most remote areas of the whole continent. It could be in a little town, rural town, little municipality that were also affected. So this was an opportunity, and the code because the faith communities have a presence in the whole of the continent, and this is an advantage. In Brazil, it is said that there are two institutions that are all around Brazil apart from the government. One of them is banks, but the other one is faith communities. And this is an advantage because if these communities are mobilized and are aware of things, they can reach the areas where the government cannot reach. And this takes us places like favelas, shanty towns, etc. These communities were affected. The faith organizations had to close many of them because they couldn't keep their teams, their equipment, and also there was a lot of misinformation. So I believe a great challenge for us was that besides vulnerability within faith organizations, also the lack of resources, information for their own communities, but also for the areas around them, their ability to support those communities around them. Also, the assumptions that affected so much those communities. In terms of our response was to take advantage of the presence that these faith communities have and all the relationship we had already with these organizations pre-COVID in order to strengthen this network of responses. So at the very beginning, we looked to develop a kind of guidance within the countries to help communities and to see how they quickly adapt. That means to have informations and to be able to work with their communities first, even in terms of services. And according to our experiences in terms of our response in Africa, that helped us a lot, even working in interfaith relations there in Africa. And to see, we had experience on how communities could adapt, even having into account their values. And they also say that we're looking to train people in order to respond to this. We worked a lot on online training because that was the most practical thing with the context that we had, and also to try to strengthen our partners' capacities with resources, either resources in terms of materials, hygienic materials, security materials, safety, also the situation of hunger in many communities. And there were cases, often, in some cases, where the families in the faith communities that were supporting other people, they were also in need of different things. And this was included in our responses. In order to do all that, we have to make alliances with other organizations at the region level in order to strengthen our capacities. A more specific case that I would like to share as an example is the case of Venezuela. Venezuela is a country with lots of challenges. We know that. Pinheiro is here. And besides all the challenges that Venezuela had, the pandemic made the situation worse. But within faith communities, there was a network called Esperanzas Sin Fronteras. And thanks to this network, we could reach all states within Venezuela and communities. And that allowed us to become partners with American funders, including the American government, in order to be able to act and to respond to the situation within the whole of Venezuela. And finishing up now, I would like to add that this alliance, this coalition of organizations, was also a framework through which we could join different faith organizations, Christian faith organizations, and they could work together. And thanks to this coalition, was able to put all kinds of expressions, faith, Protestant, Catholic, Presbyterian, etc., and other organizations, faith organizations that have also participated. Other faith organizations also joined this response. We were able to reach 21,000 faith leaders to take part in these activities, 2,700 communities within the continent, 3,000 associations that were umbrella organizations, and 21 countries. Even though we have presence in 15 countries, precisely because of this coalition, we could reach 21 countries. I would like to end up talking about some learnings. As it's been said before in the opening session, faith communities are a critical aspect of responses, but they are also vulnerable. And we have to take this into account when we are working in this kind of coalitions and in the programs we are developing. Because at the same time that they are part of the response, they also have their own necessities, and we have to take into account. Another finding or learning is that it's very important to take into account the religious practice, the beliefs that we have to take them into account to be respectful of their beliefs. And this allows people to leverage their own opportunities to work with their communities and benefit people. Another important aspect is that we have to have a multidimensional approach to work in different areas, training, capacity building, but also the implementing actions, program areas, as well as the advocacy area, and also resource mobilizing. And since we are an organization whose priority is childhood, this is a common point that unites us as an organization, which is that in all communities, rural, urban ones, when we talk or we put emphasis on childhood to protect children, the fact that we have millions and millions of children that are excluded from schools, the cycle of vaccination is in some places is not happening, there are other illnesses that are coming back. All these are key aspects to act in order for children to be visible. This has to do with faith communities, so we can have a common agenda in order to keep working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Muy buenos días. Me siento muy agradecida de la oportunidad que tengo de.
Good morning. I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter Saints. And I would like to share a writing which is in the Mormon book in Mosiah 2:16 that says the following: "And I say these things for you to learn these things. When you're serving other human beings, you are serving your God." And as a faith community, I understand that each one of us is characterized by this service that we give to people all around the world. It doesn't matter what religion we have, what beliefs we have, we are here to help each other. And with this, I would like to add that since the COVID-19 pandemic began, many people have lost families, friends, jobs, have suffered from mental health, and even many have lost their faith. And since the pandemic began, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has given help in 155 countries around the world through more than 1,600 projects in the world. Within those, we include personal protection equipment, health supplies, food security help, and collaboration with organizations in order to provide COVID vaccines around the world. Collaboration associations have been fundamental for our church to maximize its impact around the world. For example, thanks to associations such as local communities from other faiths, even we were able to send resources to places where
ayuda a los bancos alimentarios para mitigar el aumento.
also the church has worked on food security within the pandemic situation. And also we have a $20 million help for the COVAX program to give millions of vaccines around the world, working with public officials. We have given 8.6 in oxygen and food to give food to almost 1 million Brazilians. Even though the church has given physical help, has also collaborated with partners and was able to send resources to the communities that most need it. Now, I would like to show you some pictures of the different projects, humanitarian projects that our church has contributed with. Well, this is the COVAX, distribution of vaccines. As you can see here, you can see the collaboration has done with UNICEF. And here we see Latter-day Saints Charity. Here you can see work in the Dominican Republic. And here in this picture, you can see the church efforts in Haiti, Barbados, Jamaica, and other countries in order to alleviate the pandemic situation in those countries. We know that because of this pandemic, we have had the issue of misinformation. And the church, as the pandemic was extending itself around the world, immediately canceled all their meetings, closed its temples, and reduced the activities that we normally use. All this was because of the wish of being a good global citizen and to do our part to combat pandemic. During the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, put out a declaration on the importance of the vaccine and the immunization towards communicable diseases. I remember that in my country, the emergency state was declared in March, and by February, our church had already given the order of closing our places of faith. The leadership of our church has a very important role in terms of misinformation, combating misinformation, and through those programs, we were able to learn the importance of how to keep updated on what is happening.
I will now show you a picture with the different leaders of the church, President Russell M. Nelson and other general authorities, receiving publicly the vaccine to set an example. What is important about the church is that we have fought misinformation through action and example. To wrap up with regard to how we can create resilient communities, when we work with other religions and other faith groups, we focus on the differences. What are the beliefs that are not common among us? And when we do that, we create a barrier which does not allow us to help each other. And instead of focusing on what separates us, we must continue to focus on our shared values and mission of helping others. As faith leaders, we are dedicated to mitigating human suffering and increasing the quality of life for all God's children. As we focus on this and let this be our motivation, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish together. Resilient communities are built upon shared values and mutual objectives that enable them to come together and face the challenges common to humanity. Only together can we be successful in our shared mission and bless the lives of all our brothers and sisters. To end, I'd like to share a video, a short, brief video showing the efforts of the church through the pandemic.
The video, please.
At the core of the gospel of Jesus Christ, there is this second commandment that we received from him, that we should reach out to those in need and take care of our neighbors. And I believe that for every disciple of Jesus Christ, this is part of our DNA, that we go and find those that are in need and try to help them, whether it is in our own community or far away in other countries. This is really at the center of our religion. COVID-19 is having an impact in everybody's lives around the world, whether it is our lifestyle that is changed or maybe jobs that have to be found. And so the church has a long tradition of being involved in humanitarian aid and welfare matters and helping others. What has happened over the past 3 months, we have sent 15 additional truckloads of food and other commodities per week to charitable organizations and other food banks in the United States and Canada. Each of those truckloads can feed 1,400 people for about a week. This is possible because of a long-standing tradition of the church to store food, and like here in this warehouse. And this is blessing a lot of lives around the world. One of the greatest examples of how the members have reached out to those in need has been the Sisters of the Church of the Relief Society, and how they have mobilized to sew masks, 5 million masks that we've done. This is remarkable. 5 million masks, 900,000 hours, and 50,000 volunteers. 50,000 volunteers. Sisters, their families, everyone, home by home, to do that magnificent work. The church does a lot of things as an organization, but we shouldn't forget that it all comes from the members. Reaching out to those in need, helping others that are needy or afflicted, is really at the center of the gospel. It is at the core of our beliefs. We try to emulate the example of Jesus Christ as disciples of people. And what is it that he did? He preached the gospel, but also he would be prompt to find the one that was in need of his comforting hand and help and caring blessings. And this is what we are trying to do. We couldn't be more grateful for the generosity of the members of the church.
Muchas gracias.
Alberto.
Thank you. I represent Cadena, which is a disaster relief and humanitarian aid organization. And unlike most of the attendees to this conference, we are not a religious organization. That doesn't mean we're not faith-based. Cadena starts through the principle of the Jewish principle of tikkun olam, which is found in the Mishnah, in the Jewish Mishnah. And its origin in the Mishnah was to update certain laws to make them more, to help them sustain social life as it was. But it's grown to mean something bigger than that. Tikkun olam now is understood as repairing the world, trying to leave the world a little better than we found it. And if we all do our little piece in trying to repair the world will be much better than we found it. Like the principle of tikkun olam, Cadena has evolved as well. We started as a small Mexican organization within the Jewish community, And now we are based in 8 countries, and the wide majority of the people that participate and are beneficiaries of our efforts are not Jewish. They are members of every community that needs assistance. Why did I say that if we are not religious, we are faith-based? We have an unshakable faith in the human spirit and the goodness of other people. And that's what fuels all our actions. We believe that everyone has within what's necessary to do good and to repair the world. Now, at the beginning of this talk, our moderator asked, how do we help each other? How do we build resilience? How do we repair the world? And I think, well, not I, Cadena thinks that fear and prejudice are the enemies to conquer. If, like Sister Rosanna said in her presentation, if we recognize each other's likeness in the other, instead of focusing on our differences, we can help each other out, build better communities, and be of service to those in need. COVID was so loud, the COVID pandemic was so loud that it drowned out everything else. But that doesn't mean the world stopped turning or that nature stopped its course. There were, during 2020 and 2021, there have been 30 cyclones or tropical storms, 2 hurricanes, one ETA was a category 4 and IOTA was a category 5. There have been earthquakes, there have been floods, and there have been fires, and there has been a constant stream of migration and migrant refugees the world over. Us at Cadena and at other sister organizations realized that even if the world stopped as it did, even if the world closed down as it did, our help couldn't. We couldn't stop. We had to keep on helping. So early on in the pandemic, we developed protocols for maintaining our humanitarian aid missions going. All of our people had face coverings. All of our people had gloves and protective gear. And we tried to help different communities with maintaining safe distance. Now, that was the most challenging part of our job, because our help, our assistance is hand to hand. We pride ourselves in bringing all the aid that we bring and delivering it hand to hand to those recipients without intermediary. Nevertheless, we did during these years more than 500 missions, aid missions, 200 of which were in Mexico and the rest were the world over. We helped communities in Argentina, in Chile, in Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, here in the US, and in South Africa. We helped over 1.5 million people. We delivered, these numbers are rounded down, but around 20,000 food kits, 40,000 first necessity items kits, 20,000 clothes kits and shelters, 150,000 kits for PPE, for protection, and almost 700 tons of food all around. But that was just the direct aid that we were able to provide. What about resilience, which is as important as helping the current crisis? Resilience is building the tools to withstand and overcome the challenges that we face. And we do that by building communities. But how do we build community when you cannot get together, when we cannot do what we're doing right now, gathering and exchanging ideas and recognizing our likenesses instead of our differences? Well, technology helped us, and we developed what we called telepláticas, which were or teleayudas, which were really community building tools through Zoom or other tools. During those transmissions, in which we broadcast to a wide audience, we gave people courses in personal finance and how to be able to withstand the economic challenges that they were personally facing through the closing of business. We gave telemedicine and we also did distance psychological help. We did guided meditations. We did exercise classes, and we did workshops for children in which we both gave them learning skills and playing skills. One of our most important initiatives, and one of which we're most proud of, is our Acompaña un Adulto Mayor. Go with, walk with an old person. Sorry. For seniors, the pandemic was especially challenging because they were cast away. They were alone. They were isolated from their loved ones, and that caused severe stress and emotional damage. So we built a net of volunteers that would call them every day, would do teleconferencing with them every day, tell them about their day, ask them how they were doing, and try to build up a distance relationship that helped them overcome the challenges of loneliness. Most of our senior beneficiaries came out of the pandemic with their spirit intact, with their health and their emotional and psychological health and well-being intact, and that's one of the things we're most proud of. And I think that I'll be done. I think I've exhausted my time. Thank you.
So since this is a very small group, let's have a very open and cozy discussion about the topics we discussed here. And if you have any questions, we can have a little more time to maybe have some personal questions also, like what your experience has been to work in the field, directly with the communities and things like that. So we invite questions. Yeah.
Primero quiero felicitar a los panelistas por su buena presentación.
First, I'd like to congratulate the panelists for their presentations, and according to the program or the topic under discussion, which invites us to think about what we can do based on the experience during the pandemic on a forward-looking basis. The question is there. It's open for you. We have listened to a report of your activities and the importance in terms of basic notions, trying to find similarities rather than differences. And this is well known, but it is good to be reminded of that. The questions would be, based on your presentations, what is the core point and the similarities so that the experience with regard to this pandemic could help us in future activities? In the case of Cadena, World Vision, what would be the reflection and the challenging future actions? First, for the communities and the organizations is how to adapt to the new normal, because it's not like going back to the past. So the world has changed and we are learning how to manage issues among the families, sustainable ways of living, how education is being developed. So an aspect would be the capacity to reinvent yourself and also to value what the communities already have, because many times we have the answers, but they are the resilient ones. In Brazil, for instance, there are many floods, and the families have been dealing with that for a long time. We should try to understand the mistakes of the organizations that are supporting people without setting aside the possibility of supporting these local capacities. An advantage of faith communities is that aspect regarding beliefs and customs. This allows us to come together and reach families and be heard by them and become involved. I think that this should be taken into consideration. So I think that this experience in Latin America that we have lived through helps us, as Alberto said, to think about these emergency situations as climate change, for instance, situations that we will continue facing the continent. Those are key learning aspects, and government roles in the case of religions as well, but regarding communities themselves, the possibility of being able to understand how these synergies are built, this support among countries.
I would also like to add, as it's been said here by my colleague on the side, something that communities have in different communities around the world is important. How we, different organizations, can support all the different challenges and always understanding that they can always give solutions to the problems they are experiencing. We, at least the ones that we're here, we hadn't lived a pandemic before, and we're always learning constantly and what things are not working right now, what things didn't work in the past, and how those things which did work can help us later in the future if we face a similar situation like the one we're living today. I understand that the support within faith communities was important, and how support networks can be created, and also the way in which we can manage communication is something that is really important to combat all this. Thank you. COVID came here to stay. That's the reality. We believe it's not the only pandemic we're going to be facing, in our experience. I believe that what these last 2 years have taught us is that we work together. If we work together and if we take the scientific measures that are needed to protect our volunteers and those who receive our help, and we also establish safety protocols both for us and for them, it's then easier to take care of the crisis that we face and to give the communities the resilience tools for them to build on those in order to face the challenges.
Buenas tardes. Gracias, Roy, Iván.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Ivan, Rosana, Alberto. This session not only helps to reflect on things, it helped me to reflect on things. When you were talking, I started to think about the following. How can we, as faith communities or NGOs, how can we be present in those moments that are the moments of most need for people, but without showing visibility? I'm not sure I'm expressing myself well. How to be present in those moments that are the moments of most need for the communities, but not showing yourself so much, not to be so visible. That's a challenge for us as faith organizations or NGOs or faith organizations. What do you mean by non-visible? I could be even more specific if you want. What I'm trying to say is when we give help to people, sometimes it happens that people are seeing that as promotion of these organizations than help. Do you get what I mean? Yeah, I understand. Especially for humanitarian organizations, this is a great challenge because they need to call attention in order to mobilize resources to give a response. For example, this $50 million that I talked before in terms of resources, at least 40% was mobilized by the same region, the region itself. The issue here is how we talk. What's the message that we give? If the message is self-promotion, then we're not thinking about the necessity, the capacities, people's resilience in order to get ahead. I think this is key. I make a huge difference between great faith organizations and those little ones that are in the communities, because those are the invisible ones. Those are the ones that act, is what Sister Joanna had said, because who is there? We need to be there. I think we need to give information, capacity building, and have the appropriate resources. This strengthens that incredible network that is very difficult to reach, not only within the pandemic, we're talking about migration, we're talking about climate phenomena, violence as well. There are many issues. And these people are there in the small communities. The best examples I have seen are very small faith communities, and those are the invisible ones. And very often they don't get the necessary support they need. So we have to think about who are we promoting. It doesn't have to be necessarily self-promotion. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there's something called the administration. And this is something by which all members above 18 years of age, we have the opportunity of receiving someone within our community. And this is something we do in silence. No one knows that we're doing it. Only our Savior sees it. In the case of the Sociedad de Socorro, that help community, these sisters made these face masks. And these sisters have a very important pact in the world. When a sister is praying and another one feels that they need to be visited, or someone that is going through a difficult situation, this is very good. And no one is seeing this effort, the effort that this sister is doing, but someone above us is. And this administration service I'm talking about, through that, we can reach all sisters and brothers around the world, even though people are not seeing this effort we're making. So this is a way to reach communities. I'm going to say something controversial. I believe visibility is not against help. The other way around. I think visibility is key for helping, because if the problem becomes visible, that's precisely how we can get more help to reach people. When we make certain community problem more visible, we can get more resources to them, to those people, more help towards that community. If, in contraposition, if people do not know about what's going on there. A pretty old example that is a classic in these issues was the USA for Africa initiative in the 1980s. The effort of artists and the song they recorded and the huge campaign that was made there became the gold standard on how to get resources for a cause in order to resolve a humanitarian crisis. We have not seen since then a better campaign in order to get resources for a cause. So I do understand the points of, taking a picture of yourself, helping, etc. But what we have seen in our volunteers, and I think I'm talking for everyone here, practically all NGOs that take part in humanitarian assistance, none of our volunteers are there to have their picture taken. But the picture does help for more volunteers to get there, for people to donate resources.
I mean, we know that development work can be done really badly, and there are some good ways to do it too. So there are some definitely risks of doing bad development can be more harmful than doing help and good, right? So my question for the panel would be, how did you localize your efforts during the pandemic? So I know that you work in different countries with different cultures, with different communities. How did you contextualize, how did you localize your efforts when you went to one country to another country?
Our volunteers are mostly sourced locally from the country that we are helping out. We have mission leaders that are trained by Cadena that not always can be locally sourced. And we have and we combine volunteers from other countries with the local people. There's countries where we have no presence and we cannot source volunteers locally. So when that happens, we try to liaison with people on the ground that are doing humanitarian work, and we send our volunteers from other locations.
Well, the first is understanding the role of the external organizations that come in to support communities, right? we cannot take the role that is the role of the community. So that's very important. That one important principle approach is empowering the community to become resilient and to overcome their own problems. So I think that's a critical point for us as outsiders or supporters to respond. The other, as Alberto said, is the more we have local volunteers or their own community responding, more adaptive and more contextualized will be the response, right? That's why the other thing is, in terms of culture, understanding the culture and their beliefs and their values are so important, particularly as we are talking about the faith-based communities, because they do have. And sometimes we do have these examples that it's hard for some external organization or even the government trying to implement a program without taking into consideration their culture, their beliefs. So that's very important for us to consider. Resourcing them in different ways, it's also critical, the material, but also, and not all the things are good, because one is the misinformation, the prejudice that mentioned. This is also, it's terrible in Latin America. We know this. It's some thing that we need to address as organizations to help them to have the right information so that they can share this. It is a critical criteria or issue to consider this multicultural dimension that we have in our continent, which is, if we are working in the Andean countries, is completely different from the Caribbean, So if we don't consider this and be very flexible to adjust and to adapt our model, operating model programs, I don't think that we are going to succeed.
First of all, it is important to understand what are the needs in the different cultures, different countries. It's not the same, for example, the needs from the Caribbean area, from Europe, or from the United States. So the church around the world has leaders that can mobilize volunteers to help those communities. For example, recently the church has a web page that is called Just Serve, where everybody, if needs a volunteer, just in that web page, shares their needs, and then the people can enroll and serve others.
Any last question from the audience? So I will ask the last question. So we see how global development works, like we often move from one agenda to another, one becomes like a really big elephant in the room. When we tackle that, then we move to the next elephant in the room. So we see that this panel is on COVID-19, not a lot of interest. A lot of people are in the refugees panel right now.
Yeah.
So refugee has become a big issue with this Ukraine war going on. What's next for your organization, and how would you even move past this enormous havoc that COVID-19 has created and then go to the next one? What's your plan?
Well, for Cadena, every crisis is our crisis. So we're still dealing with some COVID, with some COVID issues, but right now we have important missions for refugees, in which we're helping with translators, we're helping with food, shelter, water, clothes. We have a big warehouse in the Poland-Ukraine border, and another one just past the Ukraine, inside Ukraine, where we concentrate. Many other NGOs help. We goes to our Poland warehouse, and we have a daily wish list from the Ukrainian side. And every day, our trucks from the Polish warehouse go to the border in Ukraine and hand over the assistance to people on the ground in Ukraine, and then we distribute it inside Ukraine, also hand to hand. We're also gearing up for hurricane season, which has been our constant, persistent crisis since our inception. Next week, we have our yearly mission to Kenya, where we distribute water and food and medicine for the drought season. What I'm getting at is that COVID is one crisis for us, but we are a humanitarian crisis NGO. It's what we do all the time. And our small size helps us to quick steering to the crisis at the moment.
Yeah, some lessons for us is that more than focus on the phenomena that happen, you need to respond, is to focus on who are the most vulnerable, where they are, and how we can work to build their resilience. So that's very important. That's why, as a child-focused organization for us, and also a grassroots organization, because we are present in the communities. As we are there, we understand their needs, including the risks that they are facing, and how we can start investing on building the resilience, supporting building this resilience. For sure, the trend analysis help us, to anticipate some of what could happen. For instance, I just came from Panama. I had meeting there with UNHCR and others, because there is a new route from the Venezuelan coming to the north, but in November last year, we were in some of these analyses in the field, and we start figuring out that this would be a trend, and how we can be prepared, pre-positioned for this. The same as the climate change. For instance, the dry corridor in Central America, that's the reality. So how we can work to see that this will reinforce the migration to the US, the violence in countries like El Salvador, Guatemala. So I think the more we understand the context and the complexity, and if we have a clear strategy addressing this and being flexible, for sure, we need to adapt all the time. The reality is becoming more and more and more complex, I think the challenge is more in terms of the donors' perceptions and expectations, because as you said, how to continue helping the donors to understand that still in Latin America, we have problems with the migrations, with Hungary, and it's not only Ukraine, because Ukraine now is in the media, and we are supporting Ukraine, but in Africa, Tigray in Ethiopia is another situation. So that's the hard part, that awareness in terms of the public awareness and helping the donors to understand and to have this balance, it is. So that's why it's also always important to have the visibility of the problems in Latin America, and also that we do have resources locally. The point is how we can, mobilize these resources and demonstrate that we are able, to respond to our own problems as well. So it's not an easy answer, but I think the more we are connected to the reality, not only seen from the high level, but there as all the organizations here are there, we can see the trends and the preparedness. I think we'll be better prepared for responding for these situations.
as I said before, we need to understand the needs from every country, every culture. Actually, the church is not only working on COVID-19 efforts, it's working with to help refugees around the world. It's helping communities to prepare for the hurricane season. For example, in my country, the leaders of the church are encouraging members to prepare their emergency plan, just in case if a hurricane comes to our country, what are going to do? It's not only focusing on the COVID-19 or the refugees, it's focusing in all the needs around the world and how the church can help those members and communities to overcome those challenges.
Wonderful. So with lunchtime approaching, I think it's a good time to break. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the panelists. You have traveled a long way. Thank you for the guests. Let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you.